Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We begin with Allah's blessed name. We praise Him and we glorify Him as He ought to be praised and glorified. And we pray for peace and for blessings on all His noble messengers, and in particular on the last of them all, the blessed Prophet Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam. As we greet you from the studios of the Islamic Broadcasting Network, here in my native island of Trinidad with Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It is today the 12th day of the month of Rajab. And so we have about 17 or 18 more days left in this month before the new moon will appear, the month of Shaban. And at the end of Shaban, of course, we will welcome Ramadan. So we pray as the Prophet ﷺ taught us to pray. This is a dua which is masnoon, meaning based on the sunnah, masnoon. Allahumma barik lana fi Rajabin wa Shaban wa baligna Ramadan. O Allah, kindly grant us blessings in Rajab and in Shaban, and grant that we might live to see Ramadan, inshaAllah. I hope you don't mind my reminding you again and again and again that the most important thing of all in Ramadan, apart from the fasting which is obligatory, is to follow the sunnah of Allah Himself, that He recited the whole Quran from cover to cover in Ramadan. He did it. Of course, He did it through Jibreel alayhi salam, the angel Gabriel. And when He recited and He gave orders to the Prophet, Allah's blessings be upon him, you must also recite it the way I recited. For Iza, this is Ba'da Uzu Billahi Minash Shaitanir Rajim, this is in Surah Al-Qiyamah. فَإِذَا قَرَأْنَاهُ فَاتَّبِعْ قُرْآنًا. And when we have recited the Quran, you must follow that way of recitation, namely, first of all, the whole Quran from cover to cover in Ramadan. And so if you've never done it before in your life, do please make the intention, the niyyah. I'm going to do it this time. And we pray that Allah might help you, inshallah, that you'll be able to do it for the first time in your life. For those who've already been doing it, please reach out to those who need help and try to help them. But if there are those who say, I am not going to make an effort, no, I don't intend to do it, then you're a danger to us, and you're a danger to this community. We don't want to see your face. Now then, next week, inshallah, we will have a second session with the sisters. Last time we had I consider her as my granddaughter, Maryam, who is just 21 years of age. I've known her since she was a child. And we had Sister Mehroon Rahman. We'll have her again, and we'll have Maryam again. But this time we're going to have a very senior member of the Muslim community, who is a very senior politician as well, and the daughter of a very distinguished Muslim leader of this country. Our sister Nafisa Muhammad will join us for that session with the sisters, which will going to be next week. I'm sorry that I have to keep on doing this, but I have to remind those of you who've been writing to me, remember the offer of autograph sets of my book is open only when you're ordering a complete set. If you already have copies of my books and you want to order more copies and you want them autographed, that's not possible. Please make your order through the bookstore. All right, now then, very interesting, very important, strategically important developments have been taking place over the last 1 week. Yes, since last we spoke to you. Number one, and that is that although the president of Turkey, Erdogan, had promised to invade Syria by the end of February if Syria did not stop its effort to liberate Idlib. But the February came and went, and he did not do it. What he did was, this man who would like to be recognized as a leader of the world of Islam, and Turkey becomes the leader of the Muslim world today. This is what he would like us to recognize him as. What this man did was, in order to be able to invade Syria, he needed help from his friends. You know who his friends are. Do you know who are his friends? Yeah, his friends are those whom Allah has prohibited us in the Quran from being their friends and allies. Allah says in the Quran, لا تتخذوا اليهود والنصارى, do not take Jews and Christians who are friends of each other. Do not take them as your awliya. لا تتخذوا اليهود والنصارى أولياء بعضهم أولياء بعض. Do not take Jews and Christians who are friends and allies of each other. Do not take them as your friends and allies. وَمَن يَتَوَلَّهُ مِنْكُمْ فَإِنَّهُ مِنْهُمْ. And whosoever from amongst you turn to them for friendship and alliance, you belong to them. You don't belong to us. Let me repeat it one more time. For these people who are deaf, dumb, and blind, and I don't know what to do to wake them up. Allah has commanded in the Quran. It is Surah Al-Ma'idah. And all those out there who have the capacity to think have been able to understand this verse of the Quran easily. But the deaf, the dumb, and the blind, they cannot. What can I do for them? Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. O you who have faith in Allah, لا تتخذوا اليهود والنصارى أولياء بعضهم أولياء بعض. Do not take Jews and Christians who are friends and allies of each other. Do not take them as your friends and allies. And whosoever from amongst you turn to them for friendship and alliance, you belong to them. You no longer belong to us. Inna Allah la yahdil qawma zalimin. Allah does not provide guidance for a wicked people. If I am wrong in explaining this verse, why don't you explain it? Come on and explain it. The deaf, the dumb, and the blind. May Allah give me a little chance to cool down with these people, yes. So he turned to his friends, and his friends, of course, in NATO. These are his friends, Erdogan's friends in NATO, because Turkey is still a member of NATO. It doesn't matter when Turkey became a member of NATO. Turkey is still a member of NATO today. And Turkey turned to NATO because Turkey could not invade Syria without NATO. So Turkey turned to its friends in NATO. They are the friends, and asked for help. And NATO said no. So Turkey realized they could not invade Syria. So he had to swallow what he had promised to invade, and he had to fly to Moscow. This is Russia's triumph. Russia's triumph because Russian diplomacy is second to none. He had to fly to Moscow, and he had to negotiate over 6 hours. And at the end of 6 hours of negotiations, they arrived at a ceasefire in Idlib, that the Syrian government would suspend its operations in Idlib. And so Erdogan is given a chance to live for another day. We're going to have to take a break. Don't go away, because I have a surprise for you today. Don't go away. We take a little break for a moment. Yes, thank you.
Let me hear you sing. Got to have my Viva, water but so much better. Got to have my Viva, water but so much better.
Viva sparkling flavored water. Water but better.
High blood pressure is as dangerous as an overpumped balloon. Measuring your blood pressure every day can save you from risk of high blood pressure. MicroLife fully automatic upper arm blood pressure monitor with stroke risk detection. MicroLife AFib screens for atrial fibrillation while taking your blood pressure. High blood pressure and atrial fibrillation are both considered controllable risk factors for stroke. If AFib is present during blood pressure measurement, the AFib icon is displayed flashing at the end of the triple measurement. Once 3 measurements are complete, the measurement data are shown on the display. MicroLife, a partner for people, for life.
Attention all bakers, doubles vendors and roti makers. Try our high quality unbleached bromate free all-purpose and baker's flour. Low price and conveniently packaged in 2 pounds, 2 kg, 10 kg and 25 kg bags. For wholesale and retail prices, contact Shiklisha Limited 665-3336 or visit us at Warrenville, Canupia. Shiklisha Limited, quality you can trust.
Fruta, taste the real Fruta. Enjoy the real Fruta. Refreshing juice of every day. Whoa, Fruta.
IBN can be viewed on the go now with the Airlink TV app for Google devices. Simply go to the Google Play Store, search for the Airlink TV app. Download the app, click on the link and fill out the form. The account activation will be emailed or texted to the user. It's safe as no credit card is needed. The first 30 days are free and you can subscribe and receive a box for your TV to stream the same content.
Bismillahi awwaluhu wa akhiruhu. Thank you for waiting. I'm sorry for that interruption. But I told you we have a surprise for you this morning, but just wait a minute for the surprise. We're talking about Turkey and the ceasefire in Idlib. We're grateful to Allah that there is that ceasefire because the suffering of the people is so great. But there's a warning that this is just a makeshift arrangement. We have no doubt whatsoever that the ceasefire will be broken. I hope not too soon. And we're going to be back to square one. And the hadith of our Prophet, Allah's blessings be upon him, is that when Jesus returned, Nabi Isa alayhi salam, and the prayer is finished in the masjid, he would then say, open the barricades, because the masjid is barricaded. And when they open the gates and the barricade and he comes out, then the Antichrist will be outside. And when he sees Jesus, he's going to melt the way salt melts in water and flee. So this is an indication that this armed insurrection in Syria is not going to end now. No, it's going to be continuing until that time. But don't be surprised if this yet another ceasefire is violated. We also have stunning news from Saudi Arabia, and that is that the king is in a coma, and who knows what's going to happen, but his son, who is popularly known as MBS, he should also be known as Adnan Khashoggi's killer. This man has now arrested his own uncle, his father's brother, and his cousin, who was the crown prince prior to him. And here is a prophecy of Prophet Muhammad again about to be fulfilled. He says that a Khalifa would die, and I have already interpreted as a Saudi king, and Allah knows best. And that when he dies, there's going to be disagreement concerning succession. We don't know how long that disagreement would last. And it is at that time of that disagreement concerning succession that a man will come out of Medina and hurry to Mecca. That's the Imam al-Mahdi, and goodbye to the kingdom of Saudi Arabia. We don't have time to analyze that today. The last stunning news has been an agreement between the United States and Afghanistan, which should pave the way for American troops to leave Afghanistan. Again, not likely to hold, not likely to hold. It's just a matter of time before the fighting resumes. Now then, for our surprise for today, we're going to take a break now from international Islamic affairs and turn to Trinidad and Tobago and to a discussion on political and economic and social philosophy. 1 year ago, I organized a session with Muslims in politics. And I wanted to teach and I wanted to explain the subject of Islam and politics from the Quran. And although David Abdullah was not a Muslim, his surname is Abdullah, and he will explain to you where that came from. But David accepted my invitation and he came and he attended the session and he participated vigorously in it. And we were honored to have him on that day. And today we are honored to have him again as our guest, David Abdullah. Welcome, David.
Thank you very much for having me, and salam alaikum to all of your many viewers.
Thank you, David. Wa alaikum assalam. David's father was the very Reverend Clive Abdullah, who was the head of the Church of England, or the Anglican Church in this country. And his father is now 90-something years of age, very highly respected, a religious personality in this country. And David's uncle, Frank Abdullah, who's also still alive, very old, he was my teacher who taught me Spanish at the Queen's Royal College, and eventually became a Trinidad and Tobago diplomat. This was before I joined the diplomatic service. All his life, David has been a very highly respected trade union leader, championing the rights of workers in this country. And so David has some knowledge, certainly, about the country and about its economy, but he was devoted mostly to the oil industry. David has now established his own political party, part of the trade union movement. He was a part of the historic Faizabad Declaration in 2010, when the tribes came together. And we'd want him to share with us some more information about that. And that coming together of the tribes in this plural, multi-religious, multi-tribal society went down very well with the country. And that alliance then went on to win the elections in 2020 and to form the government. And I believe David was a minister of government, if I'm not wrong.
No, I was a senator, but, I was offered a ministerial position, actually.
He was offered a ministerial position, yes.
Yes. And
he turned it down. But subsequently, he and his party left the alliance and left the government. And we are truly happy to welcome David today to Signs of the Times. And I think because you're well known in this country, but the recording of this video is going to be viewed around the world. And so it will be beneficial, David, if you could introduce yourself. So I will get to know more about you, and our viewing audience will get to know more about you, about your background. David, could you tell us something about yourself?
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. And I was fascinated to hear you speak about the situation in the Middle East and so on. I think it's very important. I'd love to come back and have a discussion with you about that and share my own views, which of course have to do with the fact that there is no state of Palestine and the aggression by the state of Israel and the United States interfering, and the West destabilizing and regime change in Libya, the invasion of Iraq, and of course Afghanistan, military intervention by both the Soviet Union then and the United States, regime change attempt in Syria. All of these things I think we need to understand in terms of what you're describing. So I'd love to come back and discuss that with you. But coming back to myself, I actually was born in Jamaica.
Oh, really?
Yes, I was born in Jamaica. I grew up there. I finished A-levels in Jamaica, and then I came to Trinidad and Tobago when my father became the Anglican bishop. He became bishop actually in September 1970. And I came just for a week or two for the big services when he was consecrated bishop, and then I went back to Jamaica to finish sixth form. And I came in July 71, and I've been in Trinidad and Tobago since July 71. My father, of course, is Trinidadian, born in Woodbrook. And his father was a public servant. And the name, we're trying to do a real family tree. One of my cousins, one of my Uncle Frank's daughters actually is doing a family tree. And there's some missing gaps that we're trying to locate. But my father knew his grandmother, who was his father's mother. She had a Western first name, Rachel, and she was Indian, and that is where the name came from India. She seemed to have come with her father, and that is where my great-grandfather, so that is my great-great-grandfather, so that is where we have some missing gaps. How did he come into Trinidad? Because then, as far as I'm aware, there are no other persons who came as indentures to Trinidad with the name Abdullah.
Okay.
There, of course, Mohammeds and Husseins and Khans and Alis and many other names. But I don't know if you know any others who actually came in the 1800s, because my father was born in 1926. His father was born in Trinidad, and so that must take you into the late 1800s. So it'd be very interesting, though we haven't pinned that down, but my great-grandmother had children with person of Afro descent, African descent, a Burkitt as far as we are aware. So my grandfather was mixed,
Okay.
and so on, which is why if you see my father, he does not look as, Indian, but he is. My mother is Japanese.
Japanese? Oh, Japanese.
Yes. She was born in Canada,
Okay.
but both my maternal grandparents were born in Japan.
Okay.
Yes, and my maternal great-grandfather migrated from Japan to the west coast of North America looking for gold.
Okay.
And found eventually, so it was between California and Alaska, and eventually found copper in British Columbia.
Okay.
And there's a copper mine, he had a copper mine. There's actually a bay where he had his copper mine, still named after him, Ikeda Bay.
Okay.
But he lost the copper mine during the Great Depression. The family then moved to Vancouver, where my mother was born. And during the Second World War, they lost everything because the Canadians deemed all Japanese
Oh, yes.
to be enemies,
Yeah.
war enemies. And so my mother and her sister, her parents, and so on, my grandparents, and other family members had to relocate up into the Rocky Mountains in Slocan City, which was not a concentration camp, but it was an internment camp.
Okay.
And that is where they lived for a number of years and so on. And my parents met in Toronto, where they were both studying, got married in Toronto, and then went to Jamaica, where I was born in Jamaica.
Okay.
So that's just a little bit of the family history.
What about your academic background?
I did maths and economics at St. Augustine. Mostly economics, a little less maths, although I did my degrees maths and economics. And right after that, in fact, while I was still at university, because I was very active at university, so I was treasurer of the Students' Guild in my first year. I was president of the Students' Guild in my second year. I was a non-playing member of Birdsong Steel Orchestra, PRO of Birdsong, and just very active in student life. and in politics as well on campus. In those days, in the 70s, there were lots of political tendencies and organizations, and I, got active in student politics, and then became a member of the United Labour Front, the original United Labour Front in 1976, contested the elections of 1976 for the Tunapuna seat. I turned 22 during that election campaign.
Look at that.
And came second to Bertie Fraser, who was the PNM candidate.
Okay.
Lloyd Best also contested the election and lost, although that was his hometown. He was very upset that his student beat him in that election. But Lloyd and I, had a very good rapport thereafter.
You and Lloyd?
Yes, yeah, we had a very good rapport. Later on, after a lot of the water had gone under the bridge. So having contested the ULF, for the ULF in 76, I then joined the Oilfield Workers Trade Union in February of 77 as one of the assistant education research officers, and then became head of the department in 78. And I was with the union until my retirement in 2016, when I left as general secretary.
What was it that attracted you to the trade union movement?
It was a matter of my politics being committed to fundamental change, and being a member of the United Labour Front. I actually offered my services first to Basilio Pandey, offered because he didn't have an education and research department. The OWTU had one, and so some of my colleagues from university were at OWTU before me. And so I offered myself to Basilio just after the election campaign, but it wasn't taken up. And so I then felt that my academic background would have been of service to the workers. And so I thought that was something that I wanted to do, because I could have gone into the corporate world, as many of my university colleagues did, and became CEOs and so on, or I could have gone into the public service and moved through the ranks, as many of my colleagues from university did, becoming permanent secretaries and so on. But I felt that there was a role for young, radical intellectuals, if you wish, to be part of that movement of workers and farmers seeking to bring about change. The 70s was a dynamic period, as you remember. And so this was just a few years after Black Power. It was at a time when the Caribbean was in ferment. The world was in ferment. The civil rights movement was in the late 60s, the anti-war, anti-Vietnam struggle. You had the national liberation struggles in Southern Africa against apartheid, against colonialism in Portuguese Africa, Guinea-Bissau, Angola, Mozambique, and so on. So the Vietnamese War was very intense. Cuba was trying to find its way as a standalone country in the Caribbean region. So this was an important period. The Palestinian struggle was very much at the forefront, Yasser Arafat and so on. So all of these influences were impacting upon me as a young person. And so I felt that I could offer my services as a progressive radical intellectual to the workers' movement. And it was accepted. And the workers or the workers in the union accepted me over time. Respect grew to respect me. So at age 24, I was the head of the Education and Research Department of the union, organizing training seminars for people who are twice my age, much more experienced in life, who respected what I brought to the table and so on. And then I became one of the spokespersons for the union. And in 1982, I was elected treasurer. When George Weeks was president general of the union, I was treasurer of the union. So I was an executive member of the union at age, 28. Very unusual to have somebody who was not a rank and file worker coming as a member of staff, becoming an executive member. So that was another breakthrough and so on. So that is what it was, that was some of my experiences.
Before we move from the trade union movement to the political party movement for social justice, your long attachment to the trade union movement and your struggle for championing the rights of the oppressed would have made you familiar then with some of the more important names in our history who have also championed the rights of the oppressed. I have longed for the day when I could get someone who has knowledge, could speak to me about Tubal Uriah Butler. I listened to him. Did you ever meet him?
No, I didn't. When I joined the union in the 1st of February, 77, he actually passed away very shortly after I joined, a week or two after I joined the union.
Yes.
He died just before Carnival, I think, that year, if my memory serves me right. So my first major union activity, if you wish, was the funeral, for Butler, so I never actually met him.
I listened to him. I was a young man. He was a spellbinding orator. Oh, yes. And he commanded a presence when he spoke.
Yes.
He had a personality that was very attractive. But I don't know enough about this most important politician that this country has ever had. I know a highway has been named after him, but I think he needs much more honor than just a highway.
Yes.
Tubal Uriah Butler was a politician of great excellence, and the British didn't like him. Could you tell us something more about him?
Well, of course, he was born in Grenada, as many people know, came to work in the oil fields in Trinidad, as many Grenadians, Vincentians did, particularly down in the deep south, Point Forte, Labre, and so on, and had an accident in the oil fields. He was a soldier in the First World War as well. Had an accident in the oil fields, which is why he walked with a limp. Was a member of the Shouter Baptist faith, was a leader in that religion, and which was also explains perhaps his oratory, because he evoked many images from the Bible and so on. He always began his meetings with hymns like "Oh God, our help in ages past" and so on, so which also made a connection with workers. But significantly, he was a member initially of the Trinidad Working Men's Association, which was formed, not by Captain Cipriani, but was formed in the late 1800s by two, what we now call pharmacists. In those days, we would say druggists, but druggist has different connotations these days. Two pharmacists, Walter Mills and Alfred Richards. But the TWA went into the doldrums, and just around the early 1914, 1915 or thereabouts, it was taken over by rank and file dock workers. And the TWA became very strong. They led a general strike that started in around October, November 1919 and ended in early 1920. It wasn't everybody going on strike at the same time, but during a 3-4 month period, every group of workers in the country, oil, sugar, dock workers to start with, workers on the railway, store workers, and so on, went on strike at different points in time. And that actually was repressed by the British, which is where we got the infamous Sedition Act, which was subject to legal challenges these days, and summary offences and other pieces of legislation which the British colonial authorities, because we are Crown Colony at the time, passed. But that 1919 strike also forced some democratic opening. So there was a commission of inquiry headed by a man called Mr. Wood. So it's the Wood Commission of Inquiry, which then led to partial adult franchise in 1925. And so some people, those who had a certain amount of property or money in the bank and who were literate in English, because there would have been former indentures who may have had the property qualifications but would not have been literate in English. They would have been literate in Hindi or Urdu or Sanskrit, but not English. And so there was an election in 1925. Captain Cipriani had taken over the leadership of the TWA about 1922, I think it was, 1921, 22. And went into the Legislative Council as an elected member for Port of Spain and got some labor reforms, workmen's compensation, minimum wages, ban on child labor, and so on. And so people like Butler joined the TWA. But by the mid-30s, as a result of the recession with the Wall Street crash and so on, Butler then broke with Cipriani. because Butler led a hunger strike coming out of the oil belt in Faizabad with workers who had been dismissed and so on and having problems. And he led a hunger march, rather, coming into Port of Spain of oil workers. When he got to somewhere in Cuba or Chaguanas, Cipriani came to meet Butler and said, turn back, I will represent the workers to the governor and to the employers. So Butler took his advice and went back, but Cipriani didn't deal with the issue.
No.
And so Butler then broke away from Cipriani and formed the British Empire Citizens and Home Rule Party and mobilized oil sugar workers in the Deep South and Central, while there was a parallel organization in the North led by a Vincentian woman, Elma Francois. There was Jim Barrett, Christina King, and others who were mobilizing in Port of Spain primarily around the docks and unemployed workers. They had the Negro Welfare, Cultural and Social Association and the National Unemployed Workers Movement. But Butler was strong in Central and South. So the strike then started on the 19th of June 1937 as a result of Butler's agitation, though the strike started accidentally. He didn't call the strike, it started accidentally. And then the British police were looking for him, the famous Charlie King incident.
Yeah.
He disappeared. I was informed by the former General Secretary, the first General Secretary of OWTU, E.R. Blades, who died at 108, that Butler actually was in Port of Spain in hiding, shaved off his beard or something like that, and was selling goods on Charlotte Street or one of those, or George Street. Nobody recognized him up there at the time. But Butler remained very significant. He came out in 1939 out of, when he was freed from the sedition charges, became organizer of the OWTU, then had a conflict with the leadership of OWTU, Rienzi and Rojas and others, because Butler was trying to organize strikes again, and the leadership of the union didn't want that.
Okay.
And Butler was expelled from the Oilfield Workers Trade Union and formed his own union, the British Empire Citizens, Workers and Ratepayers Union, and then organized oil workers in conflict with the OWTU. And there was a very sharp conflict between the two unions, especially in 1946, because Butler was detained a second time and kept on Nelson Island as a danger to the war effort. And when he was released at the end of the Second World War, he began agitating again. And there was a strike in the oil fields in 1946, and organized by Butler, not by OWTU. And there was a big, intense struggle. And eventually, Butler was banned from the South. He had to relocate to Port of Spain. His headquarters were on St. Joseph Road, opposite where the opposite Riverside Plaza there, on St. Joseph Road in that area. And there was a famous raid on his headquarters by the police. The commissioner was a fellow called Muller, and a European, and they call him Two-Gun Muller because apparently he carried two guns. I don't know if the current commissioner of police thinks of Two-Gun Muller. So Butler's headquarters were raided, people were arrested during that strike period of 46 and so on. And the OWTU won that struggle with some underhand methods, because our information was that the OWTU organized strike breakers to help to break the strike, which was very anti-union, anti-worker, but it was an intense battle for who's going to control the workers. And Butler contested the 1946 elections, his party. He made a mistake of contesting against Albert Gomes in Port of Spain and lost, but a number of members of his party won the elections. And in the 1950 elections, his party actually got the largest number of seats in the Legislative Council.
How many? Was it 6?
It may have been 6. It may have been 6 or 7.
So he was the largest party in the party.
That's right. But in the Legislative Council, which was comprised of both elected persons and nominated persons, nominated by the governor. The governor's nominated persons, together with others, Roy Joseph, Albert Gomes, and others, they were larger in number than Butler's 6 or 7. And so Butler was denied the right, in a sense, of being elected.
So the period 1950 to 1956 saw the marginalization of Butler through successful British politics.
That is correct. That is correct. That is correct. And so he left Trinidad. He was in England for quite a length of time, supposedly raising funds and so on, but he was in England between 50 and 56 for quite some time. Came back in 56, and his party again won some seats. But the PNM under Eric Williams, rather than forming an alliance with Butler's party to form the government, had an agreement with the governor for the governor's nominated persons to support the PNM.
Okay.
Yes.
What would you say would be your assessment of his legacy? What success did he achieve as a leader and as a champion for the rights of the oppressed?
Certainly, the strike movement of 1937 was his greatest moment as a leader of workers in that sense. And the 1937 strike and protests, because there were street protests and demonstrations as well, was central to the British determining that they had to relinquish the colonies in the West Indies. Because there were also strikes and protests in Jamaica in 1938, in British Guyana just before, in St. Kitts, in Barbados, and so on. So there was a workers' movement that emerged. And Arthur Lewis wrote a very important pamphlet called Labor in the West Indies when he was a student in London, just after, he wrote it about 1938, for the Fabian Society, which was one of the British socialist organizations. And it was revived sometime in the early 80s, I think. Susan Craig, Tobagonian historian and sociologist, found the manuscript, and it was republished. And it's a very important description of all of the economic and social circumstances and the industrial protests right throughout the British West Indies in the 30s, written by Arthur Lewis, later Sir Arthur Lewis, Nobel Prize winner in economics and so on. And so it's very important, descriptive, almost real-time analysis. And he said that the future of the West Indies is in the hands of the labor movement, that the workers have struck an important political blow for freedom. So the right to vote, full franchise, we got in 1946. The independence came out of that. The demands that were put forward were for nationalization of the sugar industry, of oil, of breaking up the sugar plantations and creating cooperatives of farmers. Those demands need to be revisited again, but they were very, very far-reaching. Butler was not necessarily a part of drawing them up, but he was central to the leader of the workers' movement in Trinidad that led to that kind of broad-based demand, and therefore laid the foundation, in a sense, for the modern independent Trinidad and Tobago. In a real sense, he was the father of independence. Not that he took us to independence, but without his struggles and the struggles of others, Adrian Cola Rienzi, MacDonald Moses, John Roas, E.R. Blades, Emma Francois, Christina King, a ton of others. Without those struggles of ordinary working people, we would not have gotten independence in '62.
I don't know if Mr. Pandey is viewing the program from his home, but apart from former Prime Minister Bastille Pandey, you are perhaps the most prominent political figure in the country now who has preserved and enshrined the past and is able to link us back to our days that we passed and show their relevance for the present time. If we do not go back to our roots, we will just be drifting people.
Agreed.
And our politicians today appear to be drifting without roots.
Yes.
And so I have given you a chance today, David, to take us back to our roots so that we can see, the country can see that here is a politician who is rooted in the roots of this country. We have so much to talk about.
Yes.
And that we're going to have another session. But before we move to the present situation, I want to turn to one more figure from the past whom you would have researched, and I have not myself researched him sufficiently, but I have the same admiration I have for Butler, I have for C.L.R. James. Could you tell us something about his role in the history of this country?
Well, I knew James personally.
You did?
Yes, I did. Oh, yes, I interacted with him when he
You
was.
read Black Jacobins?
Oh, yes, it's one of the most important books that I've ever read. Very, very important book on the
Black
Haitian Revolution.
Jacobins, go to the internet and check it out. Black Jacobins. The author is C.L.R. James, a very prominent intellectual of this country, and you can read that book and get some more knowledge about him. Yeah.
Yes, and of course he was a defining author about cricket. One of the most important books ever written about cricket is Beyond the Boundary.
Beyond the Boundary.
Written by C.L.R. Yes, I knew Nello. His nickname was, popular name was Nello. I had the privilege and honor of knowing him. The ODB who housed him, George Weeks, who was his friend and comrade for many years.
You're going to have to raise your voice because they're
sorry.
complaining. They're not hearing you properly. Yeah.
Yeah, George Weeks, who was President General, agreed to have CLR stay at one of the union's properties in San Fernando, on Circular Road, not too far from the union's headquarters. And we, so I was able to interact with CLR, from time to time. And I last saw him in London, where he was living in London, in Brixton, in late 1988. And he died, of course, in 1989. And he had asked the union to bury him, to be responsible for his funeral.
Okay.
He had asked George Weeks, and Weeks had agreed. When Aaron MacLeod became President General in 87, he asked MacLeod the same, made the same request. And MacLeod said yes. The union made a commitment. It wasn't just George Weeks, the individual, but Weeks, as President General on behalf of the union, made a commitment. And that commitment we will honor. And so the union took responsibility for organizing his funeral in June of 1989. He died at the end of May, and the funeral was in June.
In Britain?
No, it was in Trinidad.
Oh, in Trinidad.
Yes, and he's buried in the Tunapuna Cemetery.
Oh, really?
And we put up a nice tombstone. It probably needs a little cleaning up and so on, in the shape of a book, and with one of his quotations from a passage that is engraved in the tombstone.
In Black Jacobins?
I'm not sure if it was from Black Jacobins or which book it was from. I don't remember exactly which one it was. He wrote so many. But James was your alma mater, QRC, the QRC old boy, and was part of an important literary group in Trinidad in the early 1930s called the Beacon Group, which included Alfred Menz, Albert Gomes, Ralph de Boissier, and some others. And interestingly, for those persons who have seen the movie 1917, directed by Sam Mendes, who is the director for the recent James Bond's movies, Australian, but his grandfather is Trinidadian, Alfred Menz, and the film is dedicated because based upon his grandfather's story in the First World War. So there was a group of persons engaged in a lot of literary work in the 30s and in 40s in Trinidad. The Braffett brothers had a debating group called Why Not in the early 40s. Neville Giuseppe, Arnold Tomassos, and others had a group in Arima in the early 40s, a literary group. So there was a lot of ferment, intellectual ferment, and James was part of that. Then went to England and became more radicalized in England. He went really to write stories about cricket and was actually a major correspondent for the Guardian newspaper, not the Trinidad Guardian, but the Guardian newspaper in England on cricket. Was a good friend of Larry Constantine, so he actually stayed with Larry Constantine, who was playing cricket in league cricket up in the north of England or the Midlands somewhere, and he lived with Larry for some time. And Larry Constantine, of course, another very important figure in West Indies cricket and in Trinidad politics. And
not
James,
so much in Trinidad politics, but certainly in cricket.
Certainly in cricket, yes. Yeah. And James then got radicalized, became a Marxist in England, wrote Black Jacobins. He wrote some very important pieces on the rise of fascism in Europe, called World Revolution, very important book, and many other pieces on Marxism. He was considered one of the foremost Marxist theoreticians on dialectics, and was very involved in culture as well, and so did literary criticisms, was an avid person with interest in film. In fact, he had a girlfriend, I suppose, a partner when he was in the United States underground, who was an actress, and there were these many letters that he wrote to her and her back about film and art and so on. So he was eventually expelled from the United States because he had gone there during the war period, but with the McCarthy program of anti-communism, he was eventually expelled, went back to live in England, came to Trinidad, was editor of the Nation newspaper, which was the paper of the PNM, fell out with Williams because he was helping Williams build the PNM, and then fell out with Williams. Williams, of course, having had a lot of respect for James, and people felt that James's influence on Williams is seen in Williams' first major book, Capitalism and Slavery, because that would have, in a sense, followed Black Jacobins.
Capitalism and Slavery was his PhD thesis.
That is correct, yes.
So James was influential.
A lot of people felt that James was influential in that book because that would have been written after Black Jacobins.
Oh, okay.
So the understanding of slavery and sugar in the context of the empires.
All right.
I think James would have helped to situate Williams a little bit in that.
Would you consider yourself to be part of the intellectual legacy of James?
Yes, yes. In fact, in our party headquarters, we have 3 photographs hung. C.L.R. James, Lennox Pear, who's another person, another QRC old boy, whose brother played Test cricket for West Indies, Lance Pear. And Lennox was very involved in culture in Trinidad and politics and law. And John LaRose, another Trinidadian from Arima, who then built a major publishing house in England, New Beacon Books, and so on. So I see myself and MSJ as this linear descendants of people like James, Lennox Pear, John LaRose.
Right. The next time we meet, David, we're going to have to go into economic philosophy and political philosophy and examine socialist economic theory and so on. But we've done a lot of background work today, and I'm very grateful for this. I want to turn to just one more person in the little time we have left for today.
Sure.
And to find out whether you find yourself also in the same intellectual legacy with Lloyd Best.
To some extent, definitely yes, and in some ways, no. Lloyd taught me Caribbean economic problems, which was a very important second-year economics course at UE. And really, it was the plantation economics school. Lloyd Best, Carrie Levitt, who is still alive, and she's 95, 96. She wasn't so well the other day, but I sent her an email and she replied and so on. And I saw her last year in Trinidad, and we had a very long conversation. So Lloyd Best and Carrie Levitt, they did the first essays on plantation economy. Carrie being European, but living in Canada. Her father was a major economist in the 20s and 30s, Carl Poliani. So Best and Levitt, George Beckford, who wrote Persistent Poverty. I knew George as well.
Persistent Poverty, yes.
Very important work.
We're going to come to that in a minute if we have the minute.
Right. Norman Gervon, C.Y. Thomas, all of these people became people who were my mentors in economics, but eventually became friends and colleagues and so on, and I was honored to be able to consider them friends and colleagues. And yes, Lloyd was very important in terms of his analysis of the state of Trinidad and Tobago and the West Indies, the Caribbean, and emphasizing always that we must do our analysis based upon our own history, our own experiences, and understanding of our own reality, and not adopt models from abroad. And so he was very strong on what he called Caribbean thought, and the importance of Caribbean thought. And I think that, yes, I hope I'm part of that type of tradition, even though I think that there are other analyses that we have to bring to bear in our society. But certainly Lloyd was an important person to me as a major teacher of economics, and later on a colleague. We collaborated on many projects later on.
Were you part of Tapia House?
No, I was never part of Tapia. Because in 1976, ULF was opposed to Tapia. And then when the ULF split, we formed the Committee for Labor Solidarity, which I convened, and then we had the Movement for Social Transformation Motion, which I led. And Motion and Tapia and others were looking to form a party of parties, Alo Likwai, Hulsi Baga, and Robert Mayers, a number of us were discussing a party of parties just before the 1995 elections, and then Patrick Manning called the elections early, and that dissipated. So I was never part of Tapia, but interacted with Lloyd and other members.
What we've done today, David, is to go back to those of our thinkers of this country who have been championing the oppressed, the rights of the oppressed. And mankind is divided into two today. Either you stand with the oppressor, which means that you rub the shoes of Washington, and you vote for Juan Guaido.
Yes.
Or you stand with the oppressed. And what we've done today is to define you that David Abdullah is totally and completely on the side of the oppressed and totally opposed to the oppressor. There is no ambiguity in this at all. We have to wrap up now, but we've only begun our discussions, and I hope that you'll come back again so we can go to political philosophy, economic philosophy, social philosophy. We have to understand what is happening with the Venezuelan economy. Was Hugo Chavez right in his economic thought and his economic policies? Is Maduro correct? Is Evo Morales doing the right thing? Was the Soviet Union correct in its economic philosophy? What is your view on socialism, your view on capitalism? What is the definition of a free and a fair market? Why is it that today wealth no longer circulates through the economy? Why is it that the poor around the world today are now imprisoned in permanent poverty? Not only is Morocco poor, but permanently poor. Not only is Egypt poor, but permanently poor. Not only is Indonesia poor, but permanently poor. Why is it that wealth no longer circulates through the economy? We're going to have interesting discussion, inshallah, when next, but I want to thank you, David, for taking time off from your very busy schedule to be with us today. I'm sure all my viewers here, in Trinidad in particular, who did not have the time to read and to understand our history, must be very, very grateful to you for taking us back today and giving us important information about Tubal Bus Butler, about C.L.R. James, about Lloyd Best. These are men whose names should be written with gold because they certainly were intellectuals of the greatest caliber, and we are proud of them. Thank you, David, and we look forward to welcoming you again another time.
Thank you very much, and I'm sorry that I got here a little bit late, but I enjoyed the discussion tremendously and look forward to coming back here again.
Thank you, David.
Thank
yes.
you.